then we should probably use. You can use.
No, I can use this. Don't worry. So good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Sorry for not being here in the morning, but they told me that we won't have the second talk, so we have enough time to discuss and to listen, to give all our speakers the time they deserve. And it's a great pleasure to have Marek here. Marek is a friend of Bologna. Everybody knows him. His work on cultural history and his papers and his book on the border between semiotics and history. So we already trying to build, establish some projects together. And I'm pretty confident that we're going to have one very, very soon. So thanks to Marek for being here and for starting our afternoon session. And the title of Marek's talk is Digital Historicity. So Marek, you have half an hour to.
Thank you, Claudio.
And then we have a general discussion.
Thank you for coming. And so as you notice, I have chosen a very vast topic for a very short paper. I hope it will serve as a kind of introduction for the whole afternoon session. And so the next papers will be more specific, more focused. But actually, my argument is very simple, if not simplistic. I claim that over the last few decades, we have been witnessing the emergence of new ways of being in time, new ways of articulating the past, present, and the future, and also new relationship with the past. In other words, to use the concept coined by François Hartog, we are witnessing the rise of a new regime of historicity. And my proposal is to call this new regime of historicity a digital historicity. Needless to say, I won't have time nor actually capabilities to analyze this very complex new regime of historicity in details. What I aim to propose today is to provide you with some kind of preliminary conceptual mapping of this new digital historicity, and hopefully being able to give you some conceptual tools how to make sense of this new, I would say, very different regime of historicity and we are used to. But before I start mapping the digital historicity, let me remind you the background of this talk, because of course this digital historicity is but the one aspect of this new situation that many scholars have called the new digital condition. And of course, it's nothing new for you that we have witnessed over the last couple of decades a fundamental societal shift in the way we think about and engage with digital technology. And therefore, indeed, there are many reasons to define our current human condition as a digital condition. So again, I will not dwell long on this digital condition, but it's, to put it very simply, it's a kind of new digitally mediated way of being, which is, in my opinion, a global phenomenon, even though today I will mostly focus, let's say, on the Western culture of digital historicity. But yes, there are many scholars who have provided similar sort of diagnoses. One of the first was Rob Wilkie, published a book called Digital Condition, 2011. Probably the best treatment so far is by German scholar Felix Stalder, Digital Condition, and the most recent one is this Robert Hassan's book, The Condition of Digitality. But to give you my own very brief description of this new digital condition based on previous scholarship, I'd say that there is four main characteristics of this digital condition. One is that next to this digital born information, we are massively transforming everything analog to digital form. Secondly, all this digitized or born digital materials are transformed into a data format. So it's datafication. Third, algorithmization, meaning that all this data is being analyzed by automatized algorithms, by automated instructions to transform input data into desired output. And finally, the fourth characteristic, the platformization, namely that all this data is channeled by global online platform ecosystem. But of course, the list remains open, the other characteristics of this new digital condition. But let me turn toward the digital historicity, because, as I said, my argument is that one of the, let's say, outcomes of this new digital condition is the new digital historicity, new relationship with the past. And I argue indeed that this digital condition kind of forces us to rethink how we conceive phenomena like time, history, memory, heritage, archives, museums, and other forms of relating with the past. So yeah, my questions are, what are the main characteristics of this new digital historicity? What happens to our sense of history when it is processed by the digital? How do we articulate past, present, and future under the digital conditions? So let me start by a quotation from an American media scholar, Steve Anderson, from his very useful book, Technologies of History. I still wonder whether I can get rid of this bottom. Who is in charge of because this will cover some part of the text, which is a bit pity. Mario, have an idea?
No.
Escape, maybe? No. Let's try it again.
No. Maybe we can leave it like that.
Yes, you're right. Yes.
We can read it.
Oh, it's not good.
Exactly, because of this condition.
Ah, I see, okay. Please make it disappear, this one.
Yes.
It's always talking about digital condition, that is how we are conditioned by digital, yes. But anyhow, I will, if needed, cover the missing part. So it's a simple idea, but it's still very profound idea of Steve Anderson. Actually, every generation of new technology changes potentially our relationship to the past. And so actually, even the very technology like written word, writing, actually profoundly changed our relation with the past. And therefore, the digital technology is the latest technological invention that definitely will have an maybe still unimaginable impact on the ways we relate to the past. As Anderson puts it, the past is routinely being remixed, reimagined, rescripted, and reappropriated in powerful and eccentric ways, often by individuals who do not necessarily see themselves as engaged in the discourse of history at all. But my plan is to give you some, let's say, basic elements of this new digital historicity, and what are the categories and to what extent we have to rethink these categories, like, for instance, memory. And I know there will be some next papers about digital memory, but it seems, especially based on the recent important works by Andrew Hoskins, that this digital memory is radically different from the, let's say, analog memory. It's kind of temporal more than it used to be spatial, and it's kind of dynamic, ever-changing, different kind of memory. But again, we'll just mark these elements. I will not go into details, hoping that some other presentation will give you more information. But yeah, there is a new kind of memory. And yes, another quote from Canadian historian who is kind of historian of internet. And he published recently, I think, quite important books called History in the Age of Abundance, how the web is transforming historical research, and also claims that with the current digital technology, we have the power of recall and retrieval at a scale that will decisively change how our society remembers. And of course, this book in particular is worrying about the way how future historians will be able to study our age, because a lot of information on the internet will disappear, will not be archived, and therefore, yeah, it's a kind of paradoxical situation, having a lot of information but not being able to preserve it. But then, of course, I think the concept of archive needs to be redefined, and this is actually one of the key terms of our project that Claudio mentioned. That we want to have a joint project between Bologna and Tallinn, and maybe also Amsterdam, or definitely Amsterdam and Turku, about redefining the notion of archive at the digital age. And here I think the work of German media archaeologist Wolfgang Ernst is important. And one of his claims is that at the digital age, the archive transforms from storage space to storage time. It can deal with streaming data in electronic systems only in a transitory way. And then there is also this other concept of temporal objects, that archival materials are becoming sort of temporal objects in constant motion and change by being in a digital format. So also archive needs to be rethought. Then heritage. Here we rely on another interesting recent book by American heritage scholar Fiona Cameron, The Future of Digital Data, Heritage and Curation in a Modern Human World. And she elaborates about this new situation, but then that heritage is not only human heritage anymore, but a lot of things that we consider as cultural heritage is produced by machines, by non-humans, and how do we cope with this, and what is this kind of modern human digital heritage, and also the fact that we leave so many digital traces, what should and how it should be considered as a heritage, and how it should be preserved and protected. So also the concept of heritage is in a deep transformation at the digital times. And then, of course, history. And again, I could have a long lecture about digital history because it comes in different forms and shapes. But I would first argue that digital technology creates new forms of history writing, from kind of collaborative online history writing, including crowdsourcing tools, etc., up to the algorithmic history, or what can also be called as a non-human writing of history, where having a sufficient amount of big data algorithms can actually create narratives about the past who might look very convincing and authoritative. But then, of course, digital technologies is changing the methods of historical research. We have new emerging fields like spatial history, network history, which are based on these new digital tools, be it different analytical softwares, how to connect different persons in the framework of social networks or in other ways. But then another point I wanted to mark out, which was made actually by late Roy Rosenzweig, an American early digital historian, that the digital age marks the fundamental paradigm shift from a culture of scarcity to a culture of abundance. And I think this is something very important. And we have used in history with this idea that there's always, too little information about the past. There is this kind of fragments, the traces of the past we have to use in order to reconstruct or provide interpretation of huge the whole societies or the long time periods. But at the age of digital condition and at the age of digitizing archives, we are in the situation of the informational abundance, that there's too much information to cope with. And yes, all the speculative discussion, which has become very fashionable in recent years about whether actually in the future the computer programs will write history and what does it mean, and whether artificial intelligence will somehow replace historians in the future, which I don't believe at all. And should probably add as a footnote that all this presentation is meant to be more like descriptive rather than normative, in the sense that I would like to map the situation as it is, but of course the ultimate message is that we need to critically analyze this new situation and see what are the risks and what are the eventual gains. But I want to zoom in into a last element I find very important in this new digital historicity, namely the digital historical games. And my belief is that the popularity of digital historical games is having a major impact on our notion of historicity, our relations with the past. And over the last few years, these digital games have become massively popular and are rivaling the Hollywood movie industry, and millions of gamers worldwide engage with the past through these virtual ludic worlds, and I argue have a different sense of historicity through these participatory, immersive, active engagement with digital representations of the past. So I believe that that it is that we have to analyze critically the function and importance of these digital games for our sense of history. Again, to give you just a conceptual mapping, I would argue that that maybe 3 or 4 main characteristics of digital historical games are as following. First, the gamification. What do digital historical games do? They impose the sort of gameplay mechanism on the, let's say, historical knowledge and historical elements, and therefore the relationship that we have with the past in the framework of digital games is a sort of gamified situation. And as one of the I think significant manifestation of this gamification is the militarization of the past, because as we will see, many of those digital historical games are framed as sort of military adventures, military battles, and first-person shooting games, and so on and so forth. But next to gamification, I would point out the concept of immersivity. And this is how these digital historical games work, that they become addictive in a way of this illusion of immersion that they are able to create, that the players are very deeply involved in this digital environment, and even more, they become kind of co-authors of this game by making choices, by making alliances, by, you know, solving problems and etc. So you become, truly kind of actor in this digital historical environment, and somehow these digital historical games, I would say, produce an illusion of reenactment, in the sense that it's like being part of historical situation and having the same limited amount of information to make these decisions. And in this respect of the, you know, mental reenactment and physical reenactment, we are facing something that we could call digital reenactment in these historical games. And just an example from how these products themselves, you know, advertise as immersive experience. For instance, a game that was published 2008 by Ubisoft Brothers in Arms, Hell's Highway, you know, tells to the buyers, the gamers, that you can step into the boots of a soldier, hit the turret and get prone with grenades from your chest and hurl them at your enemies, see and feel the blast of nearby explosions, and so on and so forth. It's actually, it's idea of immersivity is also an important selling argument. And then ultimately interactivity, which of course comes together with the immersivity. But the games, again, are built in a way that you can interact and that you can, as I said, kind of co-author the game and also interact with other players when we're talking about these massive online games that are played together and not in a solitude. But to give you just at least one example, especially as I believe that most of you are not playing historical digital games, and I'm sorry if I'm mistaken, but I think one of the most interesting examples of these immersive interactive historical games is the Assassin's Creed series, which is also one of the most popular historical digital games we have. And so far, almost 160 million copies have been sold, and also a lot of spin-off projects, including games and films and other transmedia projects. So it's a massively popular game, and I guess that any history book ever sells like millions and millions of copies. So far, I said there are 12 games published within the series, and 2 other are in preparation, should come out maybe later this year. And what is important that these games, they're all situated in very specific historical context, and the Ubisoft company paid a lot of attention, even hiring historical consultants to have these historical environments as realistic, as convincing as possible. Of course, the storyline is not maybe that important, but it's a kind of centuries-long struggle between 2 secret societies, which then these struggles take place in specific historical contexts, from the Holy Land during the Third Crusade, from Renaissance Italy, from America during the War of Independence and 7 Years' War, the Golden Age of piracy, Caribbean, also Paris during the French Revolution, Victorian era London, the last series taking place in Viking Age England, and so on and so forth. And it's a very demanding sort of game, because it takes up to 60 hours to reach the end of the game. And of course, you can spend much more time depending on your choices. So it's again a very immersive, almost physical experience. And I just wanted to give a random example of one of these Assassin's Creed game, which takes place in the time of French Revolution. And so the hero is making his way throughout the enemy. A few minutes to get them out. Can be both following behind the hero, but also you can identify with them. Okay. End of the series, but the idea is that actually you can move around different buildings and make your own path throughout the 18th century Paris, or in the Renaissance time Florence, and again, create an illusion that you might know this historical environment. And of course, I can only imagine at the school situation when the teacher has to teach, history of French Revolution, then there's some people who have spent weeks in playing this game, and they have very different, almost intimate idea about the with Paris at the time of French Revolution. They might know by heart the street names and in which building you can, have a shortcut, etc. But maybe what is also interesting is that since 2017, this company also introduced a new feature, the so-called Discovery Tour, a virtual museum, which makes that you can also visit this reconstructed digital historical environment, not for the sake of the game, but just to get to know the architecture, the objects, and different cultural practices. And for instance, Assassin's Creed Origins, which takes place in ancient Egypt, you can visit the different historic sites, and I selected yet another example from the from this claim from the Library of Alexandria. So you can visit the library and you will receive a lot of technical information, and you can basically engage with the people. You can read the manuscript. And so that's a good point. I actually don't have a clue how the look like, but in this case, you might have an idea that you know exactly how it looks like. So this is meant to be kind of educational feature and meant to be used eventually as history classes at school. Okay, so I've come to my conclusion, which will be a bit long as well. But yeah, the central claim remains that this new digital condition brings along a new regime of historicity, of different way of being in time. And it has different important characteristics that I believe still needs to be critically analyzed and to start reflecting about eventual consequences or impacts of this digital historicity on our notion of the past, of time. Let me point out four consequences as I see them. First, I would call it specialization of time. Indeed, it looks like that the representation of history under digital conditions no longer has almost any constraints on its ability to make any place or event from the past visually present on the screen. So as we saw from these examples from the Assassin's Creed, it's all about creating a kind of reconstructing or creating a historical space where you can move. And so the time is not that important anymore. It's kind of this new virtual sense of the past is first and foremost a spatial sense of the past. But in addition to this, it seems that we could relate to this new specialization of time to kind of real-time historicity, as it was proposed by American scholar Deborah Withers in her book, Feminist Digital Culture and the Politics of Transmission. So she says that digital is composed of multiple internally different real-time historicities that enact the performative expression of inauthentic temporal differences. So there's a kind of lot of the times of real times that are brought together. And actually, in a way, it reminds me kind of returning to this pre-modern notion of time, where time is multiple. There is plenty of times taking place in various spaces. Or a similar idea that was advanced by an American digital humanist, Alan Liu, and he calls it historicity of the now. In his book, Defending the Past, The Sense of History in the Digital Age, was published a few years ago. And now is the order of the day. And now is history as it really is, with no walls. And that's an important shift, that history is, there is no walls, because it happens right now in the front of your screen, and you're part of it. And you can eventually even change it. But paradoxically, it seems to me also that maybe from another angle, we can also talk about the temporalization of space. And I already referred to the work of Wolfgang Ernst, and this is one of his arguments, that space becomes temporalized with the archival paradigm being replaced by permanent transfer, recycling, memory. So this digital past is a kind of fleeting, interactive, and dynamic past, therefore acquiring certain temporal characteristics. So maybe, yeah, so it needs to be scrutinized how to combine these two paradoxical or contradictory phenomena of the specialization of time and temporalization of space. Then thirdly, I would also argue for a kind of new participatory history. And of course, again, video games are the perfect example of this, but just one element among other digital media tools and gadgets. For instance, one of the first academic studies into the digital historical games by Adam Chapman, the book called Digital Games and History, How Video Games Represent the Past and Offer Access to Historical Practice. He explains that how these digital games open up kind of a storage space for shared authorship, and the historian. Actually, the player is at the same level as the developer historian. They are kind of maybe it's still illusionary idea, but this is how the players themselves conceive them, being part of the history making. And finally, we can probably talk also about virtualization of the past. And here I also give a few other references. One of the early articles actually about attempting to analyze this new digital historicity, as I call it, by Claudio Foggo, digitalizing historical consciousness, says that this digital historicity, it doesn't use the term, marks the shift from the questions of representation, historical representation, to the questions of sensory immersion. And so it will define history as the experience of the virtually past. And is seconded by German-American historian Wolf Kannsteiner. Also another important article in the field, Alternate Worlds and Invented Communities, that memories of virtual worlds and virtual interactions will become our most cherished memories, and therefore our most powerful and real memories. So by engaging with these virtual realities, we actually are creating virtual memories, but these virtual memories are as important as used to be the real memories, personal experience memories. So we are maybe at least the new generation digital natives are creating a personal treasure of virtual memories. And in this respect, in the new digital condition, the past is no longer made present, but made virtual. And that's the end of the talk. Thank you for your introduction.
Very much, Mark. While we switch the speakers, just a commentary. I don't know, but I'm pretty sure you know that. But when Notre Dame, the church, has been burned into fire, the French government asked Ubisoft, which is a French company,
French Canadian sort of,
because they made the most accurate work of reconstruction of the interiors of the church of Notre Dame in order to rebuild it like it was in some way. So, so in some way they don't only reconstruct history in their own terms, but they also reconstruct the world according to this kind of work that has been done before.
Absolutely.
Okay, so thank you. We switch to the next talk, which is a talk by Francesco Mazzucchelli, who is the director of our TRAM, our Center for Semiotic Studies on Memory. Francesco is almost associate professor, he's almost official, so he's not a researcher anymore, and he is an associate professor here at the University in Bologna. He works, usually works on this kind of topics of cultural heritage, memory, mainly connected to urban spaces. His first book was on the rebuilding of the Yugoslavia towns after war. So he worked on the rewriting of collective memory since his PhD thesis in some way. So he's a very specialist on this kind of topic. And also Mario made his PhD thesis on this kind of works, and is now teaching visual semiotics in Rome. And there is a forthcoming book that will be out in English soon. It's a kind of rebuilding and reworking on your PhD thesis. It was also on this idea of nostalgia in the past, and also in semiotic of memory and in cultural identity. So there are two specialists on that, so I leave them the word. And I don't know if Francesco is going to start or Mario is going to do that. But
I'm going to start. Thank you. Thank you, Claudio, for this very nice introduction. Thank you all for being here. What we are going to present you today is something we have started working on just only recently, in the past weeks. Something that we actually, as Claudio said, is something we've been reflecting a lot, but this specific topic is relatively new. We kind of wanted to welcome the invitation also Marek to reflect together on this idea of digital archives and on a possible semiotic approach to digital archives. So please bear with us. It's something that really a work in progress, as they say, and we are also interested in your feedbacks and comments, of course. So we are going to explore the theme of archives in digital era, but archive in a restricted sense, in a particular interpretation of this word archive. You know, archives means many things. This word can be used to signify different things. So what do I mean? On the one hand, we could, in these years, the topic of archives and digitization in general is being investigated a lot, especially in terms of possibility to access the documents, but also how digitization is changing the nature itself of archive as an institution also. This has been recently investigated also in semiotics. There is a work of Matteo Traleani that has worked on this topic since many years, but recently, a couple of years ago, special issue of Signata was published on the topic of semiotics of archive. So this is just a sentence to show you how this group of people is trying to reframe the problem of archive and archive in digital era under the semiotic lens, let's say. So the archive involves approaching a field with multiple materialities and practices. The archive is based on a paradoxical semiology, a mythology, preservation and access. Preserving and making accessible is always redefining, rethinking, remaking, is always a resemiotization, re-enunciation somehow also. And it's something that we are going to explore, especially in the second part of the talk. But to today, sorry, this is not, we are going to explore the second, this more restricted, let's say, understanding of the word archive. Archive considered as a semiotic form of organizing contents, because we are somehow convinced that archive as a semiotic form has penetrated somehow the languages of contemporary social media, especially, and contemporary social media includes today tools to archiving and browsing contents generated by the users. You know, it is a different meaning of the word archive. We are not talking of archive in a traditional historical term. But still, these quasi-archive are implemented in social media. So archive as a semiotic form, especially as it is used and adopted in the languages of new digital media and especially social media. And we start from the very banal, actually, observation that digital platforms and social media today includes kind of archives of some sort, I mean, tool that allow to store and somehow classify contents. And so archive is a constitutive semiotic function of social media. It has a different weight on different social platforms, social media platforms. We could also differentiate somehow between different social media according to the different emphasis given to the possibility of storing, archiving versus the communicative and sharing function, which of course is predominant on social media. And if we isolate this couple, this semantic category, communicating, storing, it's not really a semantic category, you see, it's not a real semiotic square, it's more a kind of a mapping, actually. We will see that there are differences between the social media that explicitly deny, for example, one of the two dimensions. Think about the Instagram stories or TikTok stories that do not allow archiving, you know? The stories are going to be deleted after a few hours or days. While there are platforms instead that are designed specifically to store content like video repository and so on. Especially then social media like Facebook and especially YouTube, today we're going to focus on YouTube, are of course more grounded on the possibility not only of sharing but also archiving and storing contents. It is kind of banal somehow, but we want to start from this pervasiveness of the archive that seems to characterize the contemporaneity. It's not something that we are inventing, proposing as a new thing. This is Pierre Nora in the famous introduction to the work, the famous survey, an article on the Between History and Memory, in which he talks of an imperative to preserve every indicator of memory, and he talks of archives in terms of secretion of lost memory or prosthetic memory, and also kind of the thought of this terrorism of historicized memory. And this is a point on which we will come back, especially at the end. Of course, another author who is who describes the causes and the effects of this pervasiveness of the archive is Maurizio Ferraris, the Italian philosopher of New Realism, who proposes a theory about this, about the centrality of document and the recording of documents, based on this notion of documentality and documanity. The new society in which we live after the Internet revolution, according to Ferraris, is based on an incessant production and recording of documents, the documentality. So he talks of a revolution that generated this new capital comes from the encounter made possible by the internet between the constitutive power of documents, now enhanced by their automation, the horizontalization of communication in social media. Everything will be recorded and archived, etc., etc. So in a way, we could say that not only the archive as a semiotic form, not as an institution, but as a semiotic form is today predominant and invades different discursive spheres in which originally a device of archiving was not even foreseen somehow, no? Like in interpersonal communication, we didn't have an archive. Now, in social media, that it's a space for interpersonal communication, we archive our conversation, which is something that has consequences that this documanity of Ferrari is talking about. But also the archive itself it's the form of archive is changing and hybridizing with the languages that are typical of these platforms. So this issue, as Marek showed perfectly, has been is being addressed by a newly formed research field, the digital memory studies, that advocates for this necessity to address this new ecology of memory, as Hoskins call it, determined by the digital revolution, a new ecology of memory that completely reshaped the media landscape and also the media landscape of collective memory. We are putting many things on the table, but at the end we'll try to connect all the dots. And we are exactly interested in this new, as Andrew Hoskin calls them, these new ontologies of memory. So there are new ontologies of memory in digital era, new objects that are produced by these new technologies of archiving and sharing information. Bashimon talks of mnemophores, rethinking the concept of semaphores by Pomian. And we will try to look at these new objects produced by this new semiotic ecosystem, but trying to look at it from a semiotic perspective that needs to focus not so much on the objects, on the nature of these social objects of memory, but on the process of textualization and re-enunciation of these objects. Just to make the story short, because I want also to leave the floor to Mario, I'm going to pass to the case study that we are going to consider, which is YouTube, considered as a digital semiosphere. So we focus on this specific digital environment considered as a social media platform that incorporates and makes use of a specific form of archive. Banal, okay, but archive in this case has to be intended also in a Foucauldian sense rather in a technical or what can be remembered and archived in this communicative environment. So YouTube as a quasi-archive, archive as a semiotic law, narrative use of semiotic archive, and YouTube as a landscape, a digital lieu de mémoire, and also as a narrative matrix, polyphonic space animated by different, also concurrent and competing voices. We focus on a specific dimension of this discursive space that we find in YouTube. It's, let's say, conflictual potential. That is the fact that sometimes this digital space becomes a digital battlefield, and it's a not very original label, but we try to focus on this digital battlefield. We're interested exactly now. Sometimes social media are turned in battlefield that use these pseudo archives and pseudo historical discourse actually to build memory. And so what is a digital battlefield? I go very quick just to show you with an example. We go out from YouTube for just for a second. The Wikipedia page, Croatian War of Independence. We take the Croatian War of Independence in the English version. If we read the Croatian page or the Slovenian page, we read a version of this of the Croatian War of Independence, Domovinski Rat, which means patriotic war or something like this. Raska, sorry, the Slovenian is not very good. Raska Vojna, which is the adjective means kind of homeland and patriotic war. Rat Uratskoj, so there are no traces in the Serbian version of the patriotic element, which is said is part of the definition of the Domovinski Rat, of the homeland war in Croatia. And the story, trust me, I'm not reading you the Serbian version, but it's very different. It's different. It's told in a very different way. The same page becomes a battlefield in which different subjectivities concur to tell the story in a different way. Very banal, we would say. It is very banal. But in a way, digital battlefield, we consider this digital battlefield as a digital space where concurrent and competing narratives of memory clash among each other. It's a concept that is linked to other concepts we've been working on also with other people in this room. I think absolutely here from University of Amsterdam, the idea of terrorscapes, of competing memories, of different narratives, concurring different narratives. So these discursive spaces of clash, set of text, intertextual note of text in reciprocal conflict. And I show you very quickly an example. This from YouTube, which is it's not what we are talking about, but just to show you how YouTube can become a digital battlefield. We have on the right side, on the left side, this video that was uploaded by a former Israeli ambassador, the truth about West Bank, in which he talks about the truth, his truth about West Bank. After some months, a reaction video to this, to the first video was shared in YouTube, uploaded in YouTube, the real truth about the West Bank, where other person telling a different story, different version of the story, kind of contrast, conflict with the first. And you see that it's very interesting, the semiotic form of this intrusion of a different subjectivity in the first narrative. So there is, on the top, you see the Israeli video, in which he explains the situation in the West Bank according to his view of the war. The second video is, there is the opponent, the narrative opponent, that intrudes, invades the enunciational space and of the first video, and stop the video, say, oh, what are you saying? This is not true, these are bullshit, and so on. And so on. So this is, I'm going to stop here because there is also something that, just before leaving the floor to Mario, think about the current Ukrainian conflict and how social media are being used. Everybody saying Ukrainian war is the first social war, which is true. It's the first social war in which, as in previous wars where media were employed, I'm thinking of historian like Mattelart has this point very clear, in which media are not a representational tool or just a propaganda tool, are another field in which war is fought. And today, the war is fought also on TikTok, on YouTube, and using, according to our hypothesis, archive. So we are interested for the moment in this very strange textual structure, which is, as you see, a very syncretic, polyphonic text in which there is a main text, a paratext, other intertextual elements that can be addressed, we think, from a semiotic point of view. And on this, I'm leaving the word to the floor to Mario.
Yes.
Ciao.
Yes, continuing our discussion, our reasoning about the semiotic use of the archive form in digital semiosphere and how memory discourses can overlap, can be integrated, or can change historical narratives. I start this second part of our presentation sharing with you some preliminary ideas, because as Francesco said, it is just more a proposal than a paper, because we are trying to navigate around the different case studies that we can discuss about this idea that the archive form can be used in digital space and how the problem of memorability can be addressed. And when I'm saying memorability, I'm referring to the fact that at a certain point, there is a value that is given to something that is memorialized. And when I'm using these categories, memorable, memorialized, I'm thinking two works, one by Claudio Paolucci and the other one by Patrizia Violi, that discussed the different modality of existence of remembering in digital spaces, considering, for example, the logic that is behind the algorithm, because we cannot be naive and think that we can access everything without considering the power, the filters that the algorithm has in relation to our, searching online things related to what we want to discover, let's say. So why we are interested in this problem and why memorability is challenging for us, because in digital space, of course, there could be everything and the opposite of everything. So we have to, in a way, trace better this kind of problem. And we are trying to test this hypothesis, considering some YouTube videos of the Yugoslav wars and the Russia-Ukrainian contemporary war. Of course, what we don't know yet today, I'm not presenting a content analysis, but just some ideas, some formal ideas, and how semiotics can say something about something, and let's say a bit different from sociological or the media studies approach, about the syncretic and polyphonic enunciation on YouTube. And we decided also to stress these two case studies because they are events where it is possible to find the textualization of the battlefield and the textualization of the different parts involved. It's quite easy to find online, especially in YouTube, the different sides, different parts that are involved in this project, in this kind of narrative that can, fight each other, or in a way creating this polyphonic digital space. How we are thinking to do that, considering on the one hand representation and on the other interaction. So how the users construct digital alternative narrative of war, and for close public discussion. So building also historical accounts and authorities, and it is another point that we want to maybe in the Q&A session discuss a bit, who has the authority in this kind of, for example, accounts that create and collect videos that are original videos from, Yugoslav war or the Ukrainian war. Who has the authority to talk about history? And also, what about what Tom was said before in relation to the history as participation? There are many layers that interact in this aspect. So here I put a quote by Ibrus Ojama. I hope I am pronouncing their surname correctly. If not, I'm sorry. Where they discussed in a cultural semiotic perspective the role, a dialogue between media archaeology and cultural semiotics in relation to the creativity of the visual archive. And they said, with traditional institutionalized archives, everything collected and represented has been selected by experts according to some disciplined knowledge system. These experts have thus managed the scope of society's dialogue with its memory. This model was disrupted by the internet, which facilitates the self-organization of consumers and their co-creation of archives and heritage content. Archives, where the majority of population seek for as well as store old content, can be also self-organizing platforms such as YouTube, Vimeo, and so on and so forth. As such, network era archives are not object-based, but user-based, an experience of reception rather than an indication of official sanction or storage location. So I'm reading this, I put this long quote here because I think it is important to consider the centrality of the user, also at a symbolic level and in relation to the construction of new economies or new logic on memory. In particular, as you probably know, I'm sure because it's quite banal and self-evident, when we discuss about digital space and when we discuss about the role that the user can have in relation to this, say, digital semiospheres, there are at least three tasks that the user has to solve. The first one is the user, which also it could be a producer that designs memory, the user that access memory. Here there is the problem, for example, of the algorithm, the popularity of the video, the filters that are deliberately chosen by the user in the search, YouTube editorial decision, because sometimes YouTube can also decide to delete some videos that are against, for example, the general rule of the community, and the user consumer again that comments memory. Starting from this perspective, that is more related to sociology and media studies, we want to stress the attention more on the textual strategies and the way in which this subject user that participate in the construction of history emerge in the text. And in particular, we decided to, as Francesco showed you before, to in a way unpack the digital semiosphere of YouTube, considering the interaction between at least three levels. The level of the text, which is, of course, the video, but also the historical documents that are used inside the video and how the remix how the use of the archive form is constructed through the video itself, and how the story is renunciated in the video using, for example, original documents, interview, and so on and so forth. And how different and new competing subjectivities are installed inside the discourse. No? So how different subjectivities that are competing, that are fighting against each other can emerge through the text itself. And then there is the intertext. Now I come back to the schema that Francesco proposed, which make things more clearer. The intertext and the constitution of memory echo chambers. No? So the possibility that if you follow specific accounts, if you are linking specific videos, you are creating a sort of confirmation effect where you always have the same, let's say, not the same, but more or less content that belongs to the same semiosphere. And then there is the paratext, which is the real place where Butterfield is evident, which is the space of the comments. No, under some YouTube videos, it is quite when they are not deleted, it's quite often to find discussion about the video itself, and they can create, of course, fighting against the two sides, or the more sides involved in the story that the video is telling. So it's not just a problem of representation of the past through the videos, but also a problem of interaction and how we can construct history through this interaction. For what concerns the text, and then I'm going quite fast in this section. It is interesting for our perspective. We want to discuss how the remixing of material from institutional archives creates new narrative, as I said, and with this kind of strategy of archive taking. So there are some videos where there are people that use original photos or photos from archive that they put inside or montage together with maybe video that are well designed with other kind of text, drawings, or so forth. For what concerns the intertext, the problem is the assemblage of documents that imitate, also at a figurative level, the archive form. So the production of archival portion inside the digital semiosphere of YouTube that function also as auto-communication for the involved side. No, because here, for example, you put some cases, the Bosnia archival war, the Bosnian War archive, another Bosnian archive, and another Serbian archive. And our idea is to study in depth not only the archival form, because as you can see, they create a sort of mosaic effect, putting also the idea of the archive, but we want also to analyze how this group self-represent themselves, choosing specific video and not other one. This is quite easy. Also, another problem of the intertext is if here there is an account that creates a collage, a montage of different videos that are chosen by the user. Of course, with the problem and the issue of the algorithm, as we said before, there is the possibility also that YouTube can choose for you. So it's a sort of meta discourse on the archive. There are different possibilities. Now the archive that is constructed and the archive that YouTube itself propose, suggesting also interpretative path, because you can have videos that are more or less connected with the principal one or not. And then, of course, the more evident problem is that we want to, when we will select the corpus. Our idea is also to consider, for example, the way in which through comments, people using, for example, emoticons or other signs, they comment and find against under the video. Here we put an example, which is just an example and nothing more. A video where there is a Bosnian fighter fighting against a Serbian guerrilla group. There was an original video from an archive, and it was an interview. And then the comments, the Serbs are mocking her because Mujahideen, and jokes like the Russian are coming, the Muslim are coming, and so on and so forth. will be. There was another slide, but it's not visible. Yes, this one, the open conclusion. We don't have real, of course, conclusion because we are just considering the terrain in which we have to conduct our research, but we have at least 4 questions in mind that we want to address in the next period of this research. How is memory made in such digital spaces? And how battlefields are evident in this kind of spaces like YouTube, and our competing subject constituted in this system. So how the different sides that are involved in the story that is narrated by the video or the YouTube itself are presented as a textual strategy, not as physical user that does things. And then, of course, how the past is renunciated, and if there are recurrences that can be traced, also in connection to the fact that maybe if we decide to continue with this idea of compare the Yugoslavian war and the Russian-Ukrainian war, to consider if there are some rhetorical recurrence in this kind of battlefield. And then the last question, which is a real open question, and then I'm concluding: how does memory become a variation of the historical discourses, quoting, imitating, or mocking the form based on the archive and this idea of montage of different elements? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Mario and to Francesco. We are perfectly in time, so I think that we just can have a break, which is scheduled now, and then we start again in an hour at precisely 4:30, because also we have the vice president of the university that we is going to greet us at 6. So let's have a coffee.
Thank you.